If you've watched any of my toy making videos on this channel, you'll probably know that I like to create figures of characters and IPs that I feel didn't get enough love or have never had a proper toy release. And recently I got it in my head that I wanted to create a toy of a character called Zool. So Zool came out in 1992 and he was basically like the Commodore Amiga's answer to Sonic. He even looked a little bit like him, like a little ninja version of him. And I thought it'd be really cool to make a figure of him because there's never really been one made. Also, I think his style would transfer really well to the kind of toys that I make. And not only that, the company that made Zool, Gremlin, actually was based in Sheffield. So there's like that little connection there as well. And I thought it would just be a cool little toy to make. And I also didn't plan on making a video about this thing. I was just going to sculpt it in my own time and just put it on my Instagram and that kind of thing. So I did sculpt one on my iPad in the normal way that I always create my toys, which you've seen me do many times on this channel. But I didn't film it, I didn't record the footage of me sculpting it or anything like that. I just created it for myself. Also recently, if you've been keeping up to date with the channel, you will have seen that I created a figure of Rom the Space Knight for Nick from the Secret Compartment show. And in that video, I asked people to let me know in the comments their suggestions of what they think would be cool for a character for me to create in my style. And there was one suggestion on there, well actually two suggestions on there, that once I saw them, I couldn't get them out of my head. And that was ToeJam and Earl. So ToeJam and Earl, again, are two characters from an old game that came out in 1991 for the Sega Genesis and the Sega Mega Drive, depending on where you was in the world. And they're again two characters that I felt would work really well in my style. So I also decided to start sculpting them as well. And again, they were just going to be for my Instagram. I wasn't going to make a video on them or anything like that. But once I'd actually created them in the iPad and I'd showed a few people, I thought, yeah, these guys kind of warrant their own video. So what I'm going to do now is skip straight to the part where I start 3D printing them and pouring resin and that kind of thing. And what I thought was probably going to be a real easy thing didn't turn out so easy. This is how I got on. Okay, so by this point I'd got them all sculpted like I said, and I was happy with how they were looking and confident that they were going to turn out okay and work well as action figures. It was off to the 3D printing stage, and for this project I had a new resin to try that I'd had very kindly gifted to me by Elegoo, the same company who provided me with all of the 3D printing setup that I'll be using in this video. So this is Elegoo's standard polymer 1000G 8K red clay resin. Now normally I always print all of my stuff in grey resin, so I was excited to give this a try, not only because I've not used it before, but also because I always think it's fun and interesting seeing things that I've sculpted in various colour variations, and it's actually pretty surprising how different they can sometimes look.
Yeah, it's almost time for Archie's nighttime meds. You can be smushy now. Also, you guys, I worked a little bit on my
So the first character that I decided to try and print was ToeJam, originally called FlowJam apparently, before somebody misheard his name and forever labelled him with a name that sounds way more disgusting, ToeJam bleh. Now for this I used all of my usual settings, and after about 8 hours of overnight printing I was left with a figure that I was very happy with. Whenever you do 3D printing stuff, you're never quite sure if it's going to turn out okay, and with it being a process that takes so long, it's always a real kick in the teeth when you go and check on it and you can see that it's misprinted, or it's got a big hole in it, or it's fell off the printing bed or whatever. Fortunately though, this time, on this occasion, it all printed out fine. I've said this many times as well, but to anybody that's new here, just to let you know, I'm no expert at this stuff. I've been doing it now for a couple of years and I still feel like I learn more every single time that I print something. You never want to follow me for any kind of tutorial advice or anything like that. There's people out there that's 1,000 times better than I am. Like I said, I'm still learning all this stuff, and although this figure might have turned out okay, the same definitely can't be said for the next one, which was Earl, who honestly from the very get-go gave me nothing but problems. When people ask me whether they should get into 3D printing, and that they're thinking about it, this is why I tell them no. Because 70% of the time doing it is dealing with stuff like this. Just messy resin. I also hate how there's no proper lip on this. There's so many times that you need to clean this thing out and pour all the resin out of it because there's been a fail, and all you get is this tiny little lip-like thing there. I really wish it had some kind of pour spout that just made it easier to pour all the resin out of the vat, because every time I do it I end up with an absolute atrocity like this. And it's so annoying! Why? So the first Earl that I printed off was probably one of the worst misprints that I've ever had. I don't know what happened with him. I did all my usual supports that normally work fine, but for whatever reason, this guy came out looking like half of him got sucked through a black hole. So I made some adjustments to the settings in the program that I use, Chi2Box, re-leveled the print bed, as that's usually always the issue with anything like this, and got everything ready for another go at it. So after like another 8 hours or whatever, I ended up with a second Earl, which initially I thought hadn't turned out too bad. Like the first inspections were looking pretty good, so I went through all my usual routine of taking it off the printing bed and getting it soaked in some IPA in the Elegoo washing station and giving it a good rinse off. But after all that, I could see straight away that something just wasn't right. For some reason, around his belly area, there was a bunch of like weird shift lines, like the kind of lines that you expect to see with FDM filament printing, not resin, which made no sense to me as I've never had that before. So again, I changed some settings, slightly altered the orientation of him, as well as some other minor adjustments, basically anything that I could think of. And to my horror, after another 8 hours, I saw again that not only was I getting the shift lines, but the whole thing was actually pulling away from the printing bed, like it wasn't even level, even though I'd leveled this thing like 4 times at this point. So I was confident that it was nothing to do with the printer or the bed leveling, and there was something just literally not working with the way that I'd sculpted him and how round his belly was and how I was angling him before he went to the printer, so that anytime I started printing him, gravity was kind of like pulling him down for some reason. So really struggling to get the orientation of this thing right. If not the orientation, then something. I don't know if you can see, but I'll show some close-ups. I'm getting some weird lines across this thing, and I don't know if it's because it's too hollow, so I made the hollowed lines thicker. I don't know if it's because of the angle, so I've put it at different angles, but for some reason, this Earl is giving me a lot of jip. So I've been speaking to Elegoo back and forth. I've also been speaking to my friend Booty, who is a very, very good resin printer, and yeah, just trying a few different things. So I had the red clay, the red 8K resin clay, and I really liked the look of that. This is the one that I printed the toe jam in, and that came out really nice. So I'm not sure what the issue is, but I've kind of rinsed a whole bottle of that now, just trying to get this one thing to print. So Elegoo, as kind as they are, have sent me 2 more bottles of that, so that's in the post. And what they've also sent me is a bottle of this ABS resin to try. So I'm gonna try this next. I hear really good things about ABS resin, so I'm gonna change my settings a little bit, because Elegoo have given me some recommendations on settings, and I'm gonna give this a whirl and see if this makes any difference. I'm also printing this Earl at a slightly different angle, and it's actually an angle that's not recommended, but I've tried all the recommended angles and it's not worked, so we'll see how we get on with this one. So in the end, I did finally manage to get it sorted with lots of help from Elegoo and repositioning him and things like that. It was literally just an issue with how he was positioned and how fat his belly was and how it was getting pulled down in the resin or something like that. But we got it sorted anyway. I also printed out Zul. He printed out no problem. I didn't film too much of that because at the time I was getting ready to leave for the UK Game Expo. But something else that I did, while I was making these, I made the mistake of showing 2 of my friends who I kind of instantly knew that as soon as they saw them, they were going to want a set for themselves. So the first one of these friends was Kev. Kev is the guy that made me this table. He's provided all the lights that I'm going to be putting into this room soon. He's always doing stuff for me. You will have seen him in lots of my videos. He's a very good guy. So when he asks for something, I can't really say no. I'm kind of in this guy's debt for life because he's done so much for me, and he will continue to do more for me as well because, yeah, no doubt there's going to be a lot. We got it sorted anyway. We did get it sorted. But I suppose it's important just to let you know that even when you're doing something like this that I've done many times and I have been doing now for a few years, you can still get hit with constant curveballs. And yeah, when it comes to 3D printing, there's always something that can throw you off guard. And just back to the Retro Ghetto and the Kev thing as well, I never mind doing favours for friends if it's something that they can't do themselves. Like, I know you cannot buy these toys. These toys were never made. You can't buy them. So, if they ask me for a copy and I'm the only person in the world that can do it, then who am I to say no to good friends like that? But yeah, I'm rambling. We got it sorted. At this point, I had a whole table full of them. I'd spent a whole day sanding them down because once you've got them off the printing bed, they've got little support marks and that kind of thing. As you know, some of these bellies had a load of ridges on them and I didn't want to waste those prints. So I spent a whole day sanding them and getting them all ready so that they could finally have some paint put on them. So I've sanded 10 toys in one day. That's the most that I've ever done in one day. Normally I will like print one and then I will sand it and I will prime it and just do one figure. Unless I've got to print multiples, then I might have like 2 or 3 to sand. But because I've left all these till now, I've basically had to do them all at the same time. So I've got 8 here and then 2 that are drying. So what I've got to do now is use this sanding stick just to to like sand all these little swords down and things that I don't want to do with a Dremel because it's too heavy and too powerful. I don't want to snap these things. And then some of these guys I had to do a lot of work on because you will have seen in the video clips, they printed out really not good. Some of them I had a lot of problems with, like the supports and how to angle them and stuff. I've been speaking back and forth with Elegoo loads. They've asked me to send them STLs and stuff so that they can print them their end. They've been super helpful. Really, really good guys over at Elegoo. Have been supporting me a lot recently, so shouts to Elegoo once again. But basically, I'm going to spend the next few hours now just doing some little tiny touch-ups with the sanding stick by hand, just getting them as perfect as possible. And I would have liked to have painted them tonight, but it's currently raining. It's rained all day, and I don't want to take these guys out and start priming them in the rain. Alex52 Miniatures will tell you that that's a terrible idea. So yeah, I'm sure if you've done anything like this before, you know how stupid it is trying to paint things in the rain. We've all done it. I've done it many times, but I don't want to mess these guys up, and I'm not on like a strict deadline. I ain't going to get them done tomorrow, or I have no other option or anything like that. I'll just have to leave it a couple of days till we've got some nice weather. But yeah, really liking how they're looking so far, and it's nice that some of these misprints that I thought weren't going to come out great and weren't going to be usable, I've managed to buff down a lot of the lines that I didn't like on them and that kind of thing, and I've got them to a point now that they can be painted and they can be given away to friends so that they can have them. So yeah, that's nice. Anyway, let's get back to it. So once they were all sanded, it was time to start getting them ready for some paint. So I started off by covering them all in a nice matte white primer, making sure that I hit them from every angle to get good coverage. And when I'm doing this, I have a few different colour options that I can go for depending on what kind of finish I want for the toy. But this time around, I went for the white because I find it's the best base coat to use if you're wanting to cover something with colours that are really popping and vibrant, which for these boys, I definitely did. Now I'm going to talk more about the kind of paints that I use for these figures shortly because it's a whole thing, but for that real legit Toy Factory look, I wanted to base coat these figures with the airbrush. And I'll admit getting all the airbrush out can be a little bit of a faff sometimes, but I also think it's worth it to get that professional finish that I always personally strive for when I'm making my toys. Also, because I still haven't got myself a proper airbrush booth yet, I had to go with the cardboard box setup, which regular viewers will have seen me use multiple times now, no doubt. And remember earlier when I was saying that this is no tutorial channel or anything like that? This is why, because of stuff like this. This is a terrible option for a spray booth. It's got no filtration in it or anything like that. It's literally just a box that I can spray into. And it's definitely something that I don't plan on doing forever because yeah, we spent all this time building this studio, making it perfect and amazing. I think it's about time that I invested in a proper spray booth to use in it. So for the base colours of these figures, I wanted to try a new paint that I've been hearing a lot about recently, called Pro Acryl. I watch a lot of Warhammer and tabletop wargaming content on YouTube, and I always hear people talk about how good these Pro Acryl paints are, especially if you want really solid base coats that have very high pigments in them. So I picked a couple of these up from the Monument Hobbies stand at the UK Game Expo, specifically with this project in mind, so I was very keen to use them and see how well they worked with the stuff that I make. Now these went down real nice, giving me the exact colour base coat that I was wanting. When I'm making these toys, as many of you will know because I've mentioned it enough times, I'm heavily influenced by 80s and 90s Playmates action figures and Kenner movie licensed toys and that kind of thing. They always had super bright and distinct paint jobs, and that's always the kind of look that I'm going for when I'm creating my own figures like this. Now the red worked perfect, and because I was making a couple of copies of these figures, I tried one with the airbrush and one just straight painting with the hand brush to see what the different results would come out like, and to be honest, both turned out pretty indistinguishable from one another. So it's nice to know that even if I don't have the time to get out the whole airbrush setup, I can use a brush with this paint, and as long as I thin it down a bit and I don't put it on too thick, I can get pretty much the same result. For the orange colour that I needed for Earl, Pro Acryl didn't actually seem to do the exact colour that I was wanting, so I had to mix my own by combining bright orange with a darker brown that they had. This again though came out really nice, so once that was all done, it was on to painting the trainers and the shorts and all of the other finer details. I'd also tried a bit of masking fluid on the eyes here, which is basically just liquid latex, something that I've used many times before, but never for miniatures or little models or anything like that, but I thought I'd give it a go, and for the most part it did work alright.
A little bit of touching up here and there, but it definitely kept the nice base colour of the white primer, which is exactly what I was wanting because again, I want to have these things looking as professional and as factory finished as possible. I always want to try and avoid having any brush strokes in any of the paint jobs that I do on these figures. I want them to look like they were painted by a machine, not a stinking human. So I'd got all the base colours sorted, they all worked great, but there was still a bunch of other parts on these figures that were going to need to be painted up. Now for the longest time, I've been using Games Workshop Citadel colours. I have used others here and there for more metallic and technical stuff and for the airbrush and that kind of thing, but it's usually always Games Workshop that I went back to, just because they're the ones that I've used for most of my life and I feel the most familiar with, but they definitely do have their limitations and there's certain colours that just don't work well when I'm trying to cover big surface areas. Recently though, I've been hearing all about these new independent paint ranges that are coming out and talking about the UK Games Expo again. In that video, I mentioned that I'd had a chat with a paint company while I was there and I was going to be talking a little bit more about them in a future video. Well, that company was Too Thin Coats, the official paint range of the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, who recently very kindly gifted me a full set of their core colours range. Now, not only was I obviously super grateful to receive these because I've heard nothing but good things about them, but when they arrived it was a perfect time because it was just as I was about to start painting the rest of the ToeJam and Earl figures. And I was going to try and save them for their own separate video and paint something that just used these, but there were a ton of colours in this set that were going to be really good for this project, and because of that I just couldn't resist breaking them out early. As the name suggests as well, these are paints that you get a really nice finish with by just using Too Thin Coats, and as I said, these are also the official paint range of Duncan Rhodes, a dude who definitely knows a thing or two about painting models, so I think I'm definitely in very safe hands with these. An important point that I want to make while I'm painting these figures as well is that these are just 3D printed prototypes. If I was going to be producing these as actual figures, they would be moulded in silicon and then cast and created in some kind of flexible resin and actually made in the main colours that I'd need them to be. So ToeJam would have been cast in a red material, Earl would be in an orange probably, and I would have also been painting them with more enamel type paints, like the stuff that we used when I painted the Turgo Sofubi in Italy or the resin figures that I made with rainbow yarn. But because these are prototypes, they're made and they're painted in a very different way, and I just wanted to clear that up if there was any confusion there. When I do actual production runs, I wouldn't use these paints, that's a whole different thing, but when I'm doing toy prototypes like this, and just one-offs for videos and figures and miniatures for my own collection, then these water-based hobby paints are always my favourite types of paints to use. Now as I'm editing this video, I'm also kinda aware that I made it look like I painted all these figures in like a day, but it was actually much longer than that, and by the time that I got to this stage, I'd been working on the paint jobs for these figures for like 4 days in total. See, colour schemes and paint jobs like this might look very simple, but because they have to be so neat, I'm constantly having to cut back on myself to keep everything crisp looking. It's very easy to accidentally dirty up the colours with each other, and when you're doing this solid colour style, you really can't hide anything in an ink wash or a dry brush or some weathering or anything like that. Everything's got to be painted to perfection or as close to it as I can get it. I'd also not even started painting the Zool figure yet, which was kind of funny because he's the one that I wanted to do from the start. So with me only being able to realistically spend like another day on these dudes before I had to start putting the video together, I did my best to get in the zone and made it my mission to get them all finished.
When I switch, I'm as feral as a lycanthrope. To live a half-life is elemental like an isotope. You could examine my successes in a microscope. I'm like Billy Casper, but the Kestrel is a microphone. I maintain the carnage, so close to the bone I get mistaken for some cartilage, so calm it. Man, I don't proclaim to be the hardest, but I've never blown the slot since a game was in a cartridge.
So I started off by using the red Pro Acryl for his bandana and his wristbands and his belt. I also used the blue Pro Acryl again to touch up his swords, and then went back to the Too Thin Coats for the eyes because there was a perfect colour in there for him called Flame Yellow. I then pulled out the Too Thin Coats Doom Death Black for all of the ninja clothing parts, starting off by lining all of the edges as neat as I could, and then filling in the main surface areas after. And at this point, I'd been working on these figures for so long, I had complete brain fog and I was so ready for this whole project to be over. So big ups to Viscount on the Mint Biscuits for keeping me going, to Whittle Goblin for keeping me entertained with her live streams, and also to my guy Escar for bringing the bars and the vibes in the studio with his brand new album, Thy Flesh Consumed, available now on vinyl and digital and all that, link in description.
So I've been painting these toys now for like 5 days, and I never expected it to take so long. There were lots of things I just didn't anticipate, which I should know by now because I've been doing it for long enough. For example, like, I have to paint this guy orange with the airbrush, and then I have to paint his shorts blue, but if I accidentally go into the orange with the blue, I can't just paint back into the orange. I have to paint back like 3 or 4 layers of orange, or paint it white and then paint orange over that a few times and do a few layers, and there's been lots of that cutting back, lots of accidentally dirty in it and then having to like paint over that with a lighter colour, and it just takes a long time. So now I've pretty much got these 2 spare ones, the ones that I'm giving away, and this has just been crazy. Normally when I do a video like this, I make 1 figure. I might print multiples to get 1 good one, and then I might do like a couple of different colour schemes, like 2 at the max, but this time I've had to make 9 figures, and yeah, never again. So what I'm going to do now is spend the rest of today just finishing up these Earls. The toe jams are all pretty much finished. Then I'm going to get these Zuuls painted, and then I'm going to get them all outside and get them lacquered, and then that's me done. So when I catch back up with you, hopefully all these will be finished, and yeah, we can do the final showcase, and I can give these 2 away and never have to look at them again, because I'm sick of looking at these things. I really am. So before I get to the big final reveal and I show you the Toe Jam and Earl and the Zuul that I made in this video in their final form, I wanted to say a big shout out first of all to Loosely Collector. That's the person that suggested that I should make a Toe Jam and Earl figure. And it also shows the power of you commenting on my videos and how much like influence you've got over me and that kind of thing, because if someone puts a cool idea in my head, I find it really hard to get it out. And there was quite a few suggestions on that thread on that video of toys that I never thought to make, and now I really want to. I may or may not have even started another one that was one of those suggestions as well, so stay tuned for that. I also think it's really cool now that I'm at a point where I can kind of create a figure of anything that I want in my style and add it to my collection. In a few weeks there's going to be some shelves on here, and all the toys that I've been making over the past couple of years on this channel, I'm going to have them all displayed on there. Some toys that are of my own creation, of my own designs, my ideas, like Crushroom and Turgo and that kind of thing. And then also figures like the ones that I've made today, just figures that I either really love the IP or I feel that the IP doesn't get enough love and I want to represent them in my own little way. But that's going to be like the thing that I want to build towards over the next 6 months. I just want to keep creating characters and adding them to this shelf. Almost like Mugen, if you remember Mugen back in the day, like a Super Smash Brothers. Just loads of characters from different things, but all made in a similar scale and a similar style, and all looking like they could kind of exist in the same world or the same game together. So again, if you've got any cool suggestions of characters that I might not have thought of that you would like to see me create in my style, then please let me know them down in the comments below. So without further ado, I'm going to show you now the final reveal, the final form of the Zuul, the Toe Jam and Earl that I spent all this time making in today's video. Enjoy!
So there you have them, my versions of Zuul and Toe Jam and Earl, a trio of early 90s game characters that up until now have never had the action figure treatment before. What do you reckon? As always, I took a little bit of artistic licensing with them and added some little details that are not canon. I also kind of mixed up the colour schemes from different games and that kind of thing, but I think I did good with these. I would say that I enjoyed making them, but this was such a slog, and next time I'm definitely going to go back to just making 1 figure and not making multiple versions of them, because yeah, honestly, this little project kind of broke me. In terms of sculpting these dudes though, that was a lot of fun, and it made a nice change to work on something that was more alien and less humanoid. I always like as well when toys have mixed media elements, which is why I chose to give Toe Jam a real chain rather than a sculpted one, and because his medallion is so big, I also gave a watch and a chain to Earl as well, just to even out the bling a little bit. One of my favourite things about Earl as well is the fact that I sculpted his sunglasses separately so that I could paint them and stick them on after, which really helped because it made the painting a lot easier, so that's something that I'm definitely going to incorporate more into my toys moving forward. The Zuul figure as well has a cool little hidden feature which I didn't talk about before, but I basically made it so that you can take his swords out of his hand and stash them in his back, and then I made his hands just big enough to hold a pair of Chupa Chups lollies. When this game came out, it was in association with Chupa Chups at the time, so I thought it were quite fitting and also gave this dude a little bit of functionality, which I just thought was a fun little addition for him to have. So overall, even though it was a little bit of a chore to get these guys finished, I'm really happy with the end results, like really happy, and I can't wait to add them to the shelf with the rest of the figures, and hopefully you enjoyed watching me make them and watching them all come together. If you did get a kick out of this video today, then please don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I'm also on Patreon if you want to help support me and keep this channel growing bigger and better than ever. And if you want to help contribute to any of the materials and the tools that I use in these videos, then I do have an Amazon wishlist. That's down in the description below, along with everybody else and everything else that I've mentioned in this video today. So with all that said and done, as always, I'm going to love you and leave you. Just want to say a massive thank you for tuning into my video today. With all of the other stuff that you can be watching on YouTube, it really does mean a lot that you come back here every single week and watch my videos, and I really hope to catch you in the next one. So until then, I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV, and I'm gone. Pow!